afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 5 of the NCHB 2020 virtual annual conference. My name is Cindy Borden. I'm Director of Training and Technical Assistance at NCHB, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's session. This is session EI4, Employment Services in a Post-COVID Environment. And we have 3 different speakers today who are going to be able to share kind of 3 different perspectives about what employment services for veterans experiencing homelessness might look like in the short term, but sort of in the future as we continue to deal with COVID and as the employment situation changes. First, we're going to hear from Lori Adams. And Lori is the Veterans Policy Director at the National Association of State Workforce Agencies, also known as NASWA. And there she is. Awesome. Thank you, Lori. And she staffs the NASWA Veterans Affairs Committee. So she works with the state veteran representatives and plans the annual Veterans Conference. She also represents NASWA on the U.S. Department of Labor Advisory Committee on Veterans Employment Training and Employer Outreach. And I won't even go through the acronym there because it's a long one. So we're thrilled to have Lori. And then after Lori, we're going to hear from Jen Rivera, and Jen is going to present the employer perspective of what things are going to look like in this post-COVID environment. And Jen has been a senior HR director for almost 15 years, and she really has leveraged her position in HR to really help homeless veterans obtain meaningful employment. And Jen actually last year won a partnership award from NCHB for her work with some HVRP programs in the Philadelphia area. So Jen will go next. And then last but certainly not least, we'll have Dee Albritton, and she's going to give us the perspective of a service provider. And Dee is the executive director of Fast Forward, and she's held that position since Fast Forward was created in 1999. Fast Forward is a program in Columbia, South Carolina, and she's worked with homeless individuals for over 25 years. She's written, received, and managed more than 50 grants, and is presented to I don't know how many conferences, and is really just a wealth of information and expertise. So with that, I think we are going to get started. And we will start with Lori.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me, Cindy. It's an honor and a privilege to be part of this event today. If you want to go to the next slide. As Cindy said, I represent NASWA, or the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. That's kind of another mouthful for an acronym. And we may be an organization that many of you may not be familiar with, but we are a state membership organization for the state workforce agencies across the United States, representing all 50 states, DC, and the territories. And we're, a policy advisory, strategic planning organization. We promote promising practices and advocate for policy and procedural changes to improve services available to the residents of all of our member states. Our organization has a number of different policy-specific areas. I represent Veterans Affairs, but you can see here on this slide it shows what those different membership, those different committees are. As Cindy said, Veterans Affairs is my responsibility. It's the largest committee in the NASWA policy group. I do have members from all 50 states, DC, Guam, Puerto Rico. And this group, they really are working on different policy areas to improve services, identifying areas where they want to advocate for additional changes within the Department of Labor structure. This is a group of people who are funded by the Jobs for Veterans State Grant. And if you're familiar with the DVOPs and the levers, these are their supervisors mostly that are part of this committee. Within that responsibility, as Cindy said, we do have an annual Veterans Conference. This committee also in pre-COVID days, we would have in-person meetings. We now meet every week. Every Friday, we talk about what's happening, what's new, what events are happening within the states, just to keep a handle on things because it is such an ever-changing environment. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. I first want to talk about what's happening with unemployment insurance because that impacts the services that are available and the way things are being delivered in the states. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. I think many people may hear or see news items about how many unemployment claims are being filed across the United States and as a result of the COVID pandemic. This slide illustrates how many initial claims, these are first-time claims filers from March 21st through September 5th. And you can see by each state's numbers there, those are the number of claims that have been filed in those states. And if you add them all together, you get 55,505,613 people have filed a first-time claim for unemployment benefits in this period of time. And add to that, they just announced yesterday that about 860,000 more people have filed. So you're around 56 million unemployment claims have been filed. And if you've heard some stories in the news about some state challenges in getting those claims paid, those stories are not being exaggerated. There has been a need for the states to kind of redeploy some of their assets and kind of rethink about how they deliver services within their states because of COVID. And this is just one part of that equation. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. This is a little confusing, and I'll try and explain it so it makes a little bit more sense. But I just want to show the impact of the COVID unemployment situation as it compares historically. This top graph shows the number of claims filed over this period of time. This graph itself is a subset of the bottom graph. This line across the bottom that says a Great Recession there, this, when you look at that, is really this top graph. So you can see the ups and downs, and that is what is in the lower graph. So you can see the amount of claims because of the Great Recession is almost a bump in the road or a blip compared to this big spike on the right side. That is the number of claims, that's the impact of COVID on unemployment insurance in the state workforce system. So it just shows, what we thought was a pretty bad event back with Great Recession really pales in comparison to what has happened because of COVID. If you want to go to the next slide, please. And this is some additional information that I need to be able to see this a little bit better myself. So just a second, please. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is the most recent information available for unemployment insurance data for all programs. And I highlighted some numbers so you could specifically see then this is the most recent information available through August 29th, UCX claims, newly discharged veterans who filed for unemployment, 914,000. And a prior year was 478. So it's actually doubled in just that period of time because of the pandemic. But the lower numbers through August 22nd, which is the most recent available here, these are people in filing claim benefits for benefits in all unemployment related programs. So through August 29th, the number of people that were claiming was 29,605,064. But the prior year for the same period of time was 1,591,456. So I show this and share this only to illustrate the impact of COVID has had on the unemployment insurance program within the state workforce agency system. The other thing that happened, and if you would go to the next slide, because of this is many of the states, um, they really weren't staffed up for this level of unemployment insurance claims load. And they had to look within their available existing human capital and human resources to help process all of these claims. So what you can see in the green are states that reassigned some of their JVSG program staff, the DevOps and leavers, to help with unemployment insurance. And there were 31 states that did that. Now, what that also, and I want to be very clear here that they were not using the JVSG or Jobs Prevention State Grant funds to pay for people doing unemployment. That would be a disallowed cost, and people, that would just be a bad thing in terms of doing financial audit. So they were paying these folks with other funds. So the states still retained the JVSG funds that they received from the Department of Labor at the beginning of the program year. Many of these states have since reverted those staff back to their original job functions, although they may be called upon to help out again if there is another surge in COVID. So let's get out of the unemployment insurance business. It's always good for me to get away from that, but I wanted to show that because I have been talking ever since I've been in this business, and it's been a long time now, that always want to stress that the American Job Center or the Career One Stop or whatever it's called that you're familiar with is not the unemployment office. It's really reemployment and employment services. That's the focus that states want to strive for, they want to achieve for. That's the line of business that is really the most satisfying in this type of work. But because of COVID, unemployment insurance has taken a front seat. And we're hoping that we'll be able to get away from that. But at the same time, those folks that filed for unemployment insurance may need a new job. Their job may no longer exist. They may be furloughed indefinitely. Some people that were furloughed early in the pandemic have now since found out that their job is no longer available. And so we have to look at other ways of, of getting information to them and providing them services. So one thing that the pandemic has done, in addition to making unemployment insurance claims go through the roof, has identified that the reality is that virtual services, virtual work, virtual events like this conference today are really the new reality, at least for the time being, and maybe the long-term reality, and for indefinitely. But working from home and working and having these kinds of activities has really taken off. And one benefit of the current pandemic is the growing realization that virtual work is real work and that a lot gets accomplished during the day and night in our home offices. I've been working from home for 5 years. I used to work for state government. I was in a brick and mortar location for 26 years. And I never thought that I could work from home. I didn't know that I really didn't know what it meant to work from home. I didn't really think that I had the right temperament because I was so used to working in a brick and mortar location. And I have since learned some of the tricks of the trade and what you need to do. And I can guarantee you that people are not sitting around in their pajamas. But the virtual reality is, and I had the opportunity when I switched into virtual work to make a transition and a smooth transition and be very planful. What happened with this is many states were forced into a virtual work environment very quickly and not necessarily in a good way that they were planning on going into that type of environment. So one thing I want to mention before we move from this slide is what I'm showing here. There's a job bank that we stood up, and this is up again part of the new virtual reality. A year ago, another endeavor that I work with is the National Labor Exchange. We stood up a job bank last year on virtual jobs pre-COVID, and our focus here was making virtual job information available to military spouses who need to, want to have a career they can take with them while they PCS. We wanted to make virtual job information available to veterans in rural areas and those for whom transportation to a job can be difficult. At the time we stood this up, we had no clue that COVID was lurking in the background, and that virtual jobs would become as widespread and prevalent as they are today. Next slide, please. So what's happened in the States is almost all of the 2,400 American job centers across the United States closed. And they closed rather quickly because of pandemic and public health concerns. And many of them remain closed today. Some staff continue to work in those closed centers serving customers. Some centers have reopened on an appointment only basis with limited services. But so when your offices are closed, but there's still customers and people that need to be served, states had to think hard and be able to pivot and adapt their service delivery model so that they could still provide information and services to people who needed career advice, career transition assistance, et cetera. A number of states, when this happened, didn't have a remote work policy. Most states did not allow the JBSG staff to work from home. That was not something they were allowed to do, and many of them did not have the right type of technology that would allow them to do that. But because of pandemic, many states sent staff home to work remotely for the first time, and states had to figure out how to deliver customer-based services in a virtual world. And they also had to figure out how to connect with their customers. And this is still an ongoing challenge. I'm not going to sugarcoat this and say that this is all working perfectly, because there, of course, are people who do not have technology. And I would venture to say, some of the homeless veterans at this conference that are population that we're talking about, access to their virtual technology, some of them may have utilized those at public libraries or coffee shops or at a homeless shelter, and some of those places have closed and not reopened, and they've limited a person's ability to reach out and use that technology. In some parts of the United States, internet access is terrible. I live in a rural community. I don't think my access is very good, but compared to other people, it probably is. But there are areas of the United States that are still struggling, or still on a dial-up. Has been a great initiative by USDA to improve internet access in rural communities, but it is certainly not by any stretch of the imagination widespread. So when people ask me, well, like that virtual job bank, well, what if a person doesn't have access to the internet? I don't have a silver bullet or a way to make that happen. But I think that it's just something that we just keep talking about and keep trying to problem solve to get information to people um, as we can. So, working from home requires access to technology, but so does receiving those services. You want to go to the next slide, please? As I said, the states had to pivot. They were used to working in an office, having a workshop in an office, maybe having a career fair where the employers actually showed up in person. Um, and obviously, those things are not happening right now. So many states had to develop virtual career fairs and drive-through events. I'm going to talk about some of these in a little bit more detail, but Maine has a Hire a Vet campaign that's been around for 5 years and has always been in person. It went virtual this week, and they launched on Tuesday. Minnesota had a resource fair, and they used Microsoft Teams for that. Wisconsin had 6 drive-through job fairs yesterday. Um, I hate to think of people living in their cars, although I know that happens, but that might be, they would have had access to that as well as anyone else, but a drive-through event rather than an in-person event. Utah had some Zoom and Facebook Live town halls, and they did virtual workshops with Google. So people have been starting to use a lot of technology. Colorado developed virtual networking events. My home state, Iowa, launched a new mobile app just this Monday that would help Iowans look for job opportunities that they can use on your smartphone. Again, if you don't have a smartphone, don't have the answer for that, but that is a new tool that's available. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, Maine has their Hire Event campaign. This is a pivot and a segue. They took this event virtual, and it originally began in 2015. Their goal was 100 vets, 100 jobs in 100 days. On Tuesday, it kicked off with 259 job seekers and 210 employers that were registered. I sat in on the launch. I heard the presentations. This event will run through the end of the year. And in addition to the career fair, they're doing a lot of virtual workshops, a lot of other hiring events. And I do know that as of yesterday, several people had already been hired as a result of this event. So this had always been in person. And they switched it around. Not to say there haven't been a few bumps in the road as they did that, but this is an example of a state that had to make changes in order to continue to provide services. Next slide, please. Colorado has done a lot of work with virtual networking events and career help. They've had career hiring events, but they've also done some case management things and worked with people. And this is just an example of a hiring event that I had the opportunity to step into, where they had a lot of employers on that were available. They were in like a little Zoom room, and people that signed up to attend this could see what jobs were available, and they could actually talk directly to those hiring managers. Instead of seeing them in person, they saw them online. And I know that people were hired as a result of this. Just this week, the state of Texas did something similar. They did a statewide hiring event, and it was a partnership between the American Legion, the Texas Veterans Commission, and the Texas Workforce Commission. And one of the takeaways from that was that the employers were not prepared because they didn't expect the large number of participants, and they didn't have enough talent acquisition staff on hand to deal with the large number of people that were looking for work. So that's just another little takeaway from a virtual hiring event. Another event was held in Minnesota. Next slide, please. They did a virtual event with the Department of Corrections because there are a number of careers that are still considered to be in high demand and essential. And certainly the Department of Corrections and jobs within that sector are still in demand, and so they partnered with Minnesota Workforce Agency to do this event as well. And you can see this is a slide example of what they're were promoting. So next slide, please. Some things haven't changed. And homelessness is still considered a significant barrier to employment by the Department of Labor, or risk of homelessness, or someone who's in a domestic violence situation that they need to get away from. So Veterans Program Letter 0314 Change 2 outlines the eligibility criteria for disabled veteran outreach program services and homelessness or risk of homelessness. And sometimes I think the risk of homelessness gets forgotten by some of the state staff because someone could be, as you all know, sleeping on mom's couch. They don't have a permanent address. And so, they would be eligible for these services. I'm thinking that a lot of the stuff that I've described already in terms of virtual services are more of a diversion tactic to help if someone's at risk in falling into this, at risk of homelessness, that they're not perhaps completely homeless yet. And if we can get them linked up to different career services or employment opportunities, we can divert that situation and avert homelessness for that population. Priority of service still applies. Veterans and eligible spouses are still required by law to receive access to Department of Labor funded employment training services first. And there's the citation for that Public Law 107-288, the Jobs for Veteran Act. So that still applies. And enrollment is still required. That still requires grantees through serving homeless veterans to enroll them in the public workforce system. This is still happening, even if the brick and mortar location is closed. These things can still be done virtually. If someone needs to access their American Job Center, people are still answering the phones. Even if the office is closed, phones have been rerouted so that if you have a number to call for a DVOP and you call that person, it's going to wherever they happen to be. Many of them have their phones connected to their home location or they have a cell phone. So these things can still happen even if the center is closed. Next slide, please. And many companies are still hiring. As I said, I think part of what the states can really focus on is helping those potentially homeless veterans and help them find employment so that they don't become homeless and not have that the comfort that we all enjoy of having a roof over our heads. So some sectors are still considered essential during the pandemic. I just listed them here. I'm not going to read these to you, but I know that I've had a number of meetings lately in the energy sector, and companies like Dominion Energy in Virginia and the Southern Company was in Mississippi that were still actively recruiting and hiring veterans, and they were offering some training assistance as well. So there are a number of companies that are still hiring. So if you take the number of people that are filed for unemployment, please don't equate that to those jobs no longer exist. There are certainly jobs that are not actively hiring, but there are a number that still are. And the other thing I would consider and reference as important is if a person doesn't have essential skills, apprenticeship is a good opportunity for people to learn and earn. And with this population, they could have access to GI Bill benefits to supplement those earnings. The last thing I want to mention is the National Labor Exchange, the other thing that I work on. This is the largest nonprofit job board of the United States. There's no cost to employers to use it, and there's certainly no cost for anyone to access the information that is on the National Labor Exchange. Those jobs only come from three sources: USA Jobs, the federal site, state workforce agency job banks, and directly from employers. The content is updated daily, so out-of-date information is removed. The employers are vetted to make sure that they are legitimate employers who are not trying to take advantage of someone by requiring some payment or upfront costs. And it currently has over 2 million job openings as well. The link I provided there is for the veterans version of the National Labor Exchange because it does include an MOS crosswalk, MOS, AFSEC, or ratings. So that's just some sort resources of information for employment opportunities. Next slide, please. I just want to point out these two things too. This is within NASWA. We have a number of information sources available on our agency website related to unemployment insurance and reemployment and recovery. And this is our agency website where you can access that information. Next slide, please. So just thank you again for the time and opportunity to present this information to you. Feel free to reach out to me. There's my contact information, my website, my email address, and our agency website. So if we have any questions, again, I appreciate this opportunity and look forward to any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lori. We're going to move right into our next speaker. Before Jen comes on, just a reminder that if you do have those questions, you can just enter them into the question box of GoToWebinar, and we'll make sure that we get as much time as possible at the end for questions. So with that, Jen, I am going to hand things over to you.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Lori, for that amazing presentation. Just realize as an employer that these are the kind of services that we need and the relationships that we definitely need to build. Currently, right now, I work for REEF Technologies, and unfortunately, with these unprecedented moments, we are facing a lot of furloughs and a lot of uncertainty within the organizational finances. We have been doing our very best to keep our team members as employed as possible, facing the challenges that we have. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about the challenges that we're having with COVID and post-COVID before I get into some of these relationship topics that I wrote down here. One of the things as an employer that we're definitely facing is an uptick in attendance. Unfortunately, we're all home. We still have staff that are out in the fields, and they are facing the same things that we are facing here. Having our new coworkers, our little ones working from school, virtually, technology issues as such. I know I've been to several meetings where technology just hasn't been the very best. Another thing we still have to deal with currently is, this epidemic of new depression and anxiety that our community is facing. Many of the things that we are working on as an industry is partnering up with our benefits department and checking out what are the services that are out there to help our team members with these depression and anxieties, these stresses of, my kids are home, who's going to watch them, us being home and who's going to help kids while they're, have questions and teachers are starting to navigate different avenues. We also have a need to have that support with EAP and work with other agencies that can help us with some of these challenges. We're also facing a lot of challenges with people being able to financially pay their bills. So some of these services that are out there that are being offered, not many of times we know what's out there. And I think that is the biggest challenge that employers face, is how to connect with these organizations that can help us keep and retain the employee. A lot of oftentimes agencies feel that once they place the employee, they get the employment and they stop following up. It becomes more than that. We deal with a lot of things after employment, how to help somebody create a direct deposit, how to explain what a 401k is, why is it important to keep the medical, things like that. And those become really difficult challenges that we as an employer face, and sometimes with little support. I work in a region where I'm almost at 4,000 team members, and sometimes we don't have the capacity or the staff to deal with some of the things that we deal with on the daily basis. I was just having a conversation with my coworker the other day, and we were talking about 95% of the time when there are issues within the workplace, it's not necessarily the workplace. It's everything that's outside, everything that is hindering the person itself. These childcare issues, these new anxieties, dealing with these health issues, death. How can I pay to stay out of work but still attend a family member's funeral? Those things become a challenge, and I think they bring this back to the workplace, and it becomes an issue that we as an employer need to strive to think of as well. So why it is important to create these partnerships? Well, for all the many reasons that I just mentioned. You guys are such an important piece to making the life cycle of our team members important, creating these goals and objectives. A lot of times I have workforce agencies that drop off people once they get employed, and I never hear from them again until they need another person to have a job. I don't like working in that fashion, and I think the reason for that is because I create a long-term relationship with the employer services. It is really important to follow up after, the person is hired. I would say within the 60 to 90 days. Why do retention rates, fall so limited? Because we don't have the services to help individuals with, rent or transportation or childcare. Unfortunately, we're limited to the resources that we have. One of the things that I try to talk to other employers are, build relationship with your community agencies. They're important. What is the pandemic doing for us right now? We have a really big uptick in workers' comp. And I know that's surprising, but workers' comp seems to be going up because we have a person who is causing a trickle effect in the workplace. Now, we may be taking all the precautions, which we are as an employer, and I know many are as well. But sometimes when an employee is coming into the workplace and isn't 100% doing his or her own due diligence and taking safety precautions, it can cause a trickle effect. People are getting infected from other people who may travel over the weekend. I know the holiday just came and we had an uptick because someone went to a party or the beach and they came back and brought this COVID to the workplace. So we are having an uptick on workers' comp. We're also having an uptick on attendance, like I mentioned. A lot of time it isn't because the person necessarily is having issues with childcare or children being at home. I've seen a lot of cases in which people are using COVID as an excuse to stay out of work. I'm sick, oh, my throat hurts. I think I have some of the symptoms. So employers need to actually come up with strategies that can remedy some of these issues. How do we know if somebody is truly having a symptom, or, do we have to prepare everyone else in the location who may have been with this employee? So there's definitely a lot of challenges that we are facing as employers that, we can use partnerships from organizations outside of the employment place. Another new challenge that we are facing is technology. While we may be furloughing in some companies, we may be hiring in others. How do we get people that don't have the use of technology to complete an application and onboarding, send in a scanned photo of their IDs, things like that? So there's definitely some new challenges with technology that we really need to take a focus on and think outside of the box. A lot of times we see people with mobile phones, but they get these mobile phones and they use them because they're all fancy, and they don't realize that they actually have a mini computer in their hands, and they have so much capabilities within their mobile phones that should be utilized. So we actually have come up with some training to show people how to download apps. Apps like their employment records, how to save your pay stubs and send them off an email. So there really is an education piece that is taking place with technology and how to explain people to use their mobile phones for the right thing. So these are some new things that we're dealing with as well. Career fairs are another one. Unfortunately, not everybody has the amenities to go out into, a place to get support with employment. So career fairs have been virtual. Not many homes have computers or the accessibility to get on technology. So we're really dealing with the technology piece. How can we get people to come to the door so that we are hiring the right people? So I want to get into some of these employment relationships. I think these are very important for me. Um, what can development agencies do to support employers? This is a really important one for me. When we hire team members, we want to keep that person in its entirety of their employment, obviously with growth opportunity in mind. Creating relationship is really important because you want to make sure that this team member does not return to your agency for support with employment. If we're offering employment, we want to make sure that the lifeline of this employee, is from start to finish. I always advise any agency that I work for to maintain a 60 to 90 day, check-in. Retention is important. We don't want to keep hiring people, and I'm sure you guys don't want to keep having people come to your agency for work. So a lot of times it's, can I get a trans pass, or I don't have the boots to walk in on the floor. I need equipment. I need safety. So we are working better at making sure these relationships stick, and we ask that our employment agencies follow up 60 to 90 days to make sure that the person who's coming on board has all the tools and is well prepared to start the job successfully. Goals and objectives are so crucial to the life cycle. Again, building relationship is important, but building goals and objectives are crucial as well. We want to know more about the team member that's coming to work for us. We want to know what their goals are, what they see themselves doing in the future. If this employer can offer a future for this employee, is there a training that this employee may want to take that can make them successful for employment future in our company? We want to invest in the team member that's going to stay. So sometimes we don't always have the tools to offer training. And I know there's so many trainings out there for team members to be successful. So working with building relationships and creating these goals and objectives for the employer and for the employee itself is very crucial. That way we're ensuring that we're keeping our people. Financial plans. This is probably one of my most important topic. We as employer face oftentimes team members that don't even know what direct deposit is. It's really hard to try to give a person all these tools with limited ability to understand. Sometimes we get team members that don't know how to buy a trans pass or don't know how to, do things with their finances, especially when they're coming from homelessness. We have a team member who has been through some anxiety, depression, some physical and emotional traumas. And then you're coming to the workplace, and sometimes you have to visit, all of these things that maybe were taught at some point, but through their trajectory have lost. And so oftentimes we see ourselves becoming financial planners, explaining to someone why it's important to hold a savings account, why it's important to buy your TransPass, 2 payrolls before you get paid the next time in case you run into an emergency. Why are company benefits so important? We know that with the veterans, most of the time they're getting veteran, vet Medicare. However, we have other benefits that maybe aren't offered. Life insurance. Why is life insurance so important? Making sure that you put a person as a beneficiary. I have been in situations where I had to decline someone the finances to bury their loved one because they just forgot to put the person's benefit. It's really sad to do that to a wife, a daughter, a mother. So we really need to get better at trying to figure this out. How can we work together to come up with a plan to make a person successful through their trajectory at work? We need to build relationship, and that's the bottom line. I am willing to work with any employer relationship company as long as we are willing to make the life cycle worth the team member. Thank you so much, and I hope this was helpful to create relationships with your employers. If you have any questions, my contact information will be placed at the end of this call. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jen. I think it's great to hear the employer perspective. We sometimes forget that employers have challenges as well. And we also applaud. I'm sure there are folks on the line who have been working with employers who may not be looking out for the holistic best interests of their veterans. And so we really do appreciate that. We're gonna shift gears now and go over to the employment services provider perspective. And so, Dee Albritton, I'm gonna hand things over to you. And Dee, I think you may still be muted.
Cindy?
Oh, I can hear you now, Dee. There we go.
Sorry. It would be the person who runs the technology center that has the problem with the technology. So thank you very much, Jen and Cindy and Lori. So what I'd like to start with is we're sort of prefacing this by calling it looking forward to a rearview mirror, because I wanted to really look at some of the things that have happened in other areas, for example, the recession, and also we went through a great flood here. So just really looking at comparing some of these things. So unemployment was higher in 3 months of COVID than it did in 2 years of the recession. Next, please. And I've got some charts in here. Y'all will have them available to you. But just to show that the 6-month net change and the 12-month net change really didn't make that big a difference during COVID. We really kind of stayed about where we were. Next, please. So here's some comparisons about unemployment rates and the recession and COVID, and you can sort of see the differences and what we're facing with some of our clients, because our clients are in some of these areas that really are taking a bigger hit this time. So job losses in COVID were primarily in leisure and hospitality compared to construction and manufacturing during the recession. And that's pretty important to a lot of us because, of course, a lot of the hospitality jobs are the ones that are a little more friendly for some of our backgrounds and are a little less strenuous for some of our workers. So workers with college degrees were 6 times more likely to have the option to telework. And I think, as we all know, that a lot of our clients would fall in that 6% with a high school diploma. So next, please. So some of the differences, 40% of layoffs will look like they will become permanent. 33% of bars and restaurants will close. 12% of retailers. Job postings for higher wage occupations are 28% below last year's trend. And job postings for jobs offering 30,000 or less are down only by 12%. And that's important for us to understand, because that means that while everybody is really pushing us to try to get people better paying jobs, we're seeing that a lot of the jobs that are still around are going to be the lower paying ones. And the number of, as Lori was saying, the number of people working from home is tripling. Next, please. So here's some of the differences in training and technology. A lot of our training resources have limited classes now. Their facilities are opening and closing, and a lot of them are not giving refunds. So if you put all your training dollars into a course for somebody, a welding course or something, and they close, and they have to shut down for a while, you're not going to be able to get that funding back, and you're not going to have an opportunity to use funds again. So, and a lot of OJT has been restricted due to folks working from home. And as Jen was saying, access to technology is imperative, but it is extremely limited. Next, please. So a lot of some other differences, of course, of working. We've got a lot of offices that are working virtually, and a lot of resources are limited on site, which means that a lot of the resources for our clients are just simply not available to them now. So in public health differences, you know, when we were going through the recession, we didn't have to worry about trying to teach our clients about the importance of, or how to use, or how to find resources for PPE. Although there was depression and we did have some lack of motivation, it's been a lot higher going through COVID than it was going through those other two tragedies here for us. We actually had 13% unemployment during the recession here at one point. So we are facing a lot of similar things, but just some very different aspects. So knowing your clients, it's so important. If we'll go into the next one. So we did a 10-year study of our clients, and we just wanted to look at a 10-year study. That was that slide you just had up, I'm sorry, of who our clients actually are, what their ages are, and their education and everything, so that we could really get an idea of how to proceed through this and where to look for things. So obviously we have this big, circle that we go through with the veteran, transportation, where we're going with training, and also for employment. So next, please. And this is the one I was telling you about. The disability at enrollment for us is 22% disabled, 13% special disabled, but that usually goes up considerably because people, once they come into programs, usually end up getting either higher disability or getting their first disability. Criminal history, 55% of our clients have had misdemeanors, 36% felonies. As you can see, most of our clients are male. So, and you can see on this that most of our clients are in that 55 to 64 age group. Our percentage has increased tremendously, even though it's only at 3% for veterans that are 65 and older, but it's really gone up in our 70 and older this time. So next, please. So our basic client is a male who's 55 to 64, has no driver's license or car, has a high school diploma, may or may not have minutes on their phone, and will be in a GPD or shelter. Next, please. And our transportation system is the thing that we really have to look at before we deal with any of this. And I know that's what a lot of Jen's been dealing with employees too. If you'll go to the next one, please. So our buses are operating on what we call a Saturday schedule here forever, it seems now, which is a very restricted schedule. There are limited people allowed on the bus, obviously. The bad news is if you're standing at the bus stop and the bus already has its 12 people that it can have, the bus drives by you. There is no other bus coming. You wait another hour, hour and a half. And so we're losing a lot of people and having a lot of struggles with transportation, getting people to work on time, obviously. Most of our manufacturing jobs in this area are absolutely not accessible by bus. And in some instances, it can take an hour and a half, 2 to 2.5 hours to go 10 miles by bus here. Next, please. So, and I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of some of the progression here. Homeless to hotel to grant per diem to apartment. In our area, those things can be miles and miles and miles apart. So if you start working with someone and they're in that hotel, you have to be very careful about what you try to do with them training-wise or job-wise, because if they move to grant per diem or that apartment, they may no longer be on the same bus schedules. They may not be even in the same area where they can get a bus. So it makes a huge difference. A lot of our lower rent apartments are not in areas that have great bus service. So next, please. Just to give you an idea on this map. And so what we have done is we took a map of our area, and you can see we have affordable housing is red dots, is purple dots, red dots is employment, green are grocery stores, and then we've got some banks on there. But you can see where the hotels and the GPDs are. And as you look at our area, what we did was actually do overlays so that we could put all these things together. If you look at this, you can see what people are really struggling with to be able to make this whole process work. When you're in that hotel, which is way out by the interstate, but most of the employment is in the downtown area, you can just see it becomes a drastic change in how to plan for sustainable employment. Next, please. Training. Next, please. So one of the things we have to really consider is when we're setting up training now, our class is offered on schedules that match the needs of your clients. Is transportation available, particularly if somebody moves into a permanent housing? How long is a class? Is it hours that match housing rules? We have one shelter here in Columbia that you must be in by 6 o'clock every night. So you've got to be really sure that even if the class gets out at 4, if the bus is going to get them back by 6 so they don't get, in trouble with their housing. And please make sure that you really check to see the policies about canceling classes or refunds. We've had somebody who's been scheduled for a class now. It's like every week for the last 4 or 5 weeks. And every week she gets another notice saying class is not going to start for another week. So next, please. So preparing clients for a virtual world, and we know everybody's doing their interviews by Zoom and WebEx and Teams and Skype. Applications are online, training is online, job interviews are by phone and video. Next, please. But our technology is just simply limited. So trying to get people connected some way through that technology by using the cell phones they have available or whatever we can do to help them. We've been doing Kindles for people. You can use very inexpensive tablets that they have at Walmart. We found that Walmart has some, I think, for $29. They're not gigantic, but you can certainly, walk people through some things. Unfortunately, they're going to have to, if they don't have any access, go to the local Dunkin' Donuts or something. But employment, just remember that client that we described is male, 55 to 64, no driver's license or car, high school diploma, minutes maybe, and is in GPD or shelter. So next. So the top 10 industries with negative changes during this, and I really want you to look at this because that man that I just described to you is somebody who, in all honesty, would probably be in the industries that have the negative changes. If you look at the next slide, which is the positive changes, then you're going to see that our clients tend not to fit into some of these pictures. So when we're looking at employment, what we really have to do now is not only think about what kind of training and how we're going to get that worked in, but we really almost have to start from the end of how do we get people to where they need to be and really work our way through that first, because it is becoming more difficult now with the kinds of bus schedules and everything. And I think that's, part of what Jen was saying, just getting people to work, having them, have the availability that they need. So I really rushed through that because I know our time was really limited and I wanted people to have time for questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dee. So much great information. We are going to take a few minutes here for questions, and we have a few. I'm going to go ahead and share my webcam so you can see me we'll see if that actually loads up as we go through these. The first question came in that I like, and it actually is probably a question for you, Dee, I think, as the practitioner in the group, but it's really the question is regarding the older veteran population and their limited computer skills, computer literacy, typewriting, all of that stuff. in addition to access and places where they could either access or practice, like libraries are closed. Do you have any ideas for how to address that, or even any ideas for maybe other sources of support or funding that might help in providing those services to those folks?
Sure. And I will, Cindy and everybody, I will send Cindy a list of some free and low-cost resources that she can pass out to everybody later. But one of your best resources is going to be GCF Learn Free. That's Goodwill Community Foundation's Learn Free site, gcflearnfree.org. Over 200 classes on there. You can access most of them even on a phone, even on a cell phone. So it's everything from typing to how to do Microsoft to how to apply for jobs. There's some really great job information on there, totally free. For those of you who are HVRP folks, if you can create an account so you can have a record of whether your client passes or completes the training. But it's excellent training. We've used it for about, since it started, I guess 18 years or something. So, but that's the best free resource that's immediately available.
Great, thanks, Dee. Lori or Jen, do you guys have any other suggestions on that about sort of how to access some of these other resources or some technology training?
Well, before COVID, I could have given you some ideas because there's some things that are available through the American Job Center. I would still suggest someone reach out to their American Job Center. As I said, you can still talk to them, and because they're going to be aware of local resources in that individual's community.
Great, thanks, Lori.
And Cindy, I've been working a lot with our local commissioners and some of our field offices, and they've been very supportive with trying to find state-related information. So that's been a source that I've been using recently.
Great, thanks, Jen. So connecting with local community leaders, local elected officials to find out what might be available. We had one question, which I think is a fairly easy one to answer, which is, what is an MOS crosswalk?
Okay, basically, it's on a job bank. It allows someone to put in what their military occupation was. Anyone who's served in the military has like a numerical code or an alphabetical code that is for their occupation. For example, 88 Mike is a truck driver. 11B, 11 Bravo is infantry. And what they can do with the crosswalk is type in that numerical code, and I've only met one person in 30 years that couldn't remember what their code was because it really defines their military experience. It's their occupation. It will then identify job. When they type that in and hit enter, it will tell them jobs that are currently available that match the skills or that occupation that person may be interested in. So it'll tie in and pull out, someone who was an infantry person. Sometimes people think, well, those jobs don't really exist. Well, in the civilian world, a person who's infantry has to take care of equipment, be a member of a team, take instruction, be a leader, be very diligent. Those are all wonderful skills that any employer would want to have. So it just allows them to identify jobs that either match their type of employment or match the skills acquired in that employment.
Great, thank you, Lori. The next question is, how can you be sure and how can you reassure veterans that the information that they are sharing through technology, through an app, through a phone, through a computer, is safe and secure, especially if they're doing job search kinds of things that require personal information? How can you help them ensure and then reassure them that that process is secure and their information is safe?
Cindy, this is Dee.
Yep, Dee, I was going to ask you, yep.
Let me refer everyone back to that GCF site again. It has a great class on internet safety. But one of the first things I would do if they're using their phone is make sure you inform them that they really need to have an antivirus on their phone to protect them on that level. And, again, I really recommend that internet safety class. It's going to help them a lot understand what they're facing. and on all the different levels, be it phone or computer.
Great. Thank you, Dee.
If I could jump in, one thing on that,
Yeah.
Cindy, one thing that we've done within NASWA is we've incorporated that all of our Zoom calls have passwords that go with them. So if you don't have the password, you can't get into the meeting. And so we see a lot of that anymore, that you don't, there was that time when there was a lot of Zoom bombing where people were just, you know, crashing other people's meetings. So we have everything password protected within all of our events as well.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. I will say, I did experience a Zoom bomb. Our community pool was Zoom bombed by a hacker when we were having a community meeting. And now on the other side, my kids are in virtual schooling, and I cannot even get into their meetings because the system is actually locked completely. And because I don't have an email address connected to the school system, I can't even go in for them. So I think folks are learning some of those lessons, but it is definitely a concern that especially the veterans that don't have the experience with and that comfort level with technology, it is certainly a concern for these folks as well. We have another question around it's an access question, but it's also sort of what do you guys think providers should do now to help prepare themselves and their veterans for when the economy comes back? And I know there are some jobs that are open now, and there are some folks that are still hiring, but there are many that are not. So if each of you could give sort of a word or two of advice of what should folks be doing now with veterans to better prepare them for the future as COVID evolves and hopefully is under control.
Wow.
I have as an employer, I think a lot of times we're facing the I-9 issue, not having the birth certificate, or I lost my social security card. I think those things are really important, and I've been trying to create a checklist because there are so many things. I don't think we're going to really move away from doing things outside of technology. I think this just really shaped the way for people to start using technology as a tool. So as an employer, we're having to figure out ways to reinvent the wheel when technology wasn't an option maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and now we have to start figuring out how trainings are going to go or prepare for another pandemic. So we really need to partner up with our community leaders to provide some resources around training on technology, making sure that people know where they need to go to get personal information. That's so important. A lot of the Social Security offices are closed. So finding another strategy or way, or finding the solution to get to a computer to get some of these things done.
Great, thank you, Jen. Lori, do you want to go next?
Okay, and I guess what I'll say is some of the lessons I think the states learned, and the states are employers as well, the state workforce agencies, they discovered, they were forced to make some changes on the fly. And I think if they were able to be more planful and and be thinking long-term strategy to have the technology available to their employees who now were in work from home situations. So I think, some of them have had to make some decisions rather quickly that they probably would have appreciated more time to think about that. So is going forward, looking at their jobs, what jobs can still be done in a virtual environment, which jobs can't be, how can they better prepare their staff to use that technology? Because I had state staff tell me, they had a computer in their office, but they didn't have a computer at home. And so it was a whole new environment for them. So just employers being able to look at what their work from home policies are, look at what type of technology is needed for someone to be successful, and looking at how can they still continue to do their job. Because I still think it's a huge issue for the states of, how to connect with those individuals who don't have who aren't tech savvy or don't have technology available to them to connect with them.
Great, thanks. And Dee?
Yes, I think one of the things that we're really encouraging our clients to do as they go through this, sort of starter job situation is really spend the time to learn a lot more technology, because that's exactly what Jen and Lori were saying. That's where this is going. This is where our clients are going to end up, and they're just going to have the technology skills. I will say we were contacted by an employer yesterday who was asking us if we could actually test their employees the technology skills so that they would know whether they would be able to handle working from home. So this is really going to be going both ways. Employers are going to be testing employees to see if they have the skills to do the things from home. So it's really imperative that we start preparing our clients for that eventuality, that that may be where they end up as they become less able to do these heavy physical jobs. If they're less able to work in a warehouse, will they be able to do order taking by phone from home? So getting to that place and getting them ready to be able to have apartments where they'll be able to invest in some internet access. So I do remind everybody that if your clients are on food stamps, AT&T is still doing their program where you can get internet, I think, for $10 a month.
Great, thank you, Jean. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think Comcast also has reduced cost or free internet access available as well. So there are resources out there for low income situations.
Great. Well, I'm looking at the time, and we've actually gone over by a few minutes, but I think it was worth it to at least get some of the questions answered. I just want to take a minute to thank all three of you, Lori, Jen, and Dee. I think there's so much great information here. We could have probably talked for another hour, but it is important as we're thinking about employment and what the future looks like for employment is taking time now while we have this time for folks who are not able immediately to secure jobs, whether it's because those folks aren't hiring or because they don't have the skills, and using that time now to build those relationships, build those skills, and prepare the veterans so that they have those opportunities later. Thank you all for your sharing your expertise and your experience with us, and for all the attendees. We appreciate you being with us all this week, and we'll look forward to next week's sessions as well. As soon as the webinar ends in just a minute, there will be a survey and evaluation that sort of pops up. Please take a minute or two to fill it out. It shouldn't take very long at all, and it does help us as we plan. So Lori, Jen, and Dee, thank you again for participating, and thank you all, and we hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.